everybody. I'm really glad that everyone was vibing with a little bit of Texas Hold'em with us. You know, it wasn't the riskiest choice we could have made, but I saw a little bit of dancing in the audience, so I appreciate that. I'm Jess. I'm the content manager at Globe Content Studio.
And I'm Kirstie. I'm head of the media strategy team, so we work really closely with the Globe Content Studio as well as the rest of our Globe solutions to create opportunities for our advertising partners.
Yeah, we don't exist without media strategy because we make a lot of content and none of you would ever see it, which is essentially what we're here to talk about in our session today. I like to think that there's two types of marketers in the world. You have your words and vibes marketers like me, your copywriters, your creative leads, the people who live in Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, and then you have your data and numbers marketers like Kirstie, who live in Excel, which is like the scariest place on my computer is like my Excel app, and I know there's a couple people who feel the same way as me because you, like me, are a words and vibes marketer. But the reason that we brought our groups together, media strategy and content studio, so much more closely a couple years ago is exactly for what I referenced at the outset, that you can't find our content. We don't work. It doesn't make sense to exist without that the collaboration, I guess, really that complementary nature of numbers and words, of data and creative. But as a creative person, if I don't understand what it is that the data is giving me based on the performance of past and present campaigns, I can't use it effectively to shape the creative that I make next, which means I really needed Kirstie to teach me about Excel. So that's where we're gonna start. If you're talking to like a words and vibes marketer, which is really, I'm gonna stick with this, how do you start? What do you need to know first, essentially?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing when you're using data is to understand what it means. I think, Sean talked about it, and in this economy, it's really, really easy to get caught up in the results. We're all looking to make a sale, to get page views or clicks to our website. And I think, in the short term, that transaction's really important. But I would argue that we're not just looking for a one and done transaction with our customers. We're actually looking to build a long-term relationship that results in customer loyalty. So in fact, when you look at that, what's actually more important is the learnings that you can generate from each piece of content or each campaign that you're running. So there's an overwhelming amount of data that's available to us. So it's really, really hard to figure out what are those metrics that you should focus on. So to begin to do that, the first thing you really have to ask yourself is, what am I trying to achieve here? What do I want my customer to do or to think? And you have to narrow that down to be able to figure out what are the metrics that best help us tell that story. And not only that, what format am I using? Because that's another layer. If you're trying to educate your customer, the way that you measure that through an article might be different than the way that you measure that via video. So via video, you might be looking at views and completion rates, but with an article, you're looking at maybe page views, time spent, scroll depth. So they're different. And then the third piece of that is really, it comes down to metrics and methodologies, which I would argue is one of the most important pieces. So just to help illustrate that, you might be a marketer that's looking to host your content on a publisher's platform. And you may be A/B testing two different publishers. And when you get those results back, you could be looking at, say, time spent as a metric to evaluate whether or not this publisher was accurately able to engage your target audience. So publisher A might show an average time spent of, say, maybe just under a minute, while publisher B shows you over 3 minutes. So right away, we might make an assumption that publisher B that gave or delivered over 3 minutes was more effective. Well, that might not actually be the case because the way that they're measuring time spent could be completely different. Publisher A, the methodology could be, maybe a lot more accurate, represent a higher majority of what those page views are, versus publisher B might only be a smaller sample set. So it's really, really important to understand the methodologies, because if you're using this data to help inform your decision making, then you have to make sure that you really understand what it means. Because I'm not up here to say, this is the ideal methodology that makes the most sense. It's just, again, just being aware of what it means. So to be able to unpack that a little bit further, I'm going to talk about how we apply that as the Globe Content Studio. So the first question, again, that you have to ask yourselves is why. So if I think about our why and our purpose as the Globe Content Studio, our goal really is to create compelling content on behalf of our advertising partners that influences perception, drives action, or drives consideration. So to fuel our business, we really have to fuel their business. And to fuel their business, then of course, results matter. This goes back to, it's not just about the results, though. This goes back to my point earlier about creating a relationship with your customers. It's not enough to just deliver a high-performing campaign. We need to continue to learn and grow along with our advertising partners. So the second piece of that is then the how. How are we doing that? How are we measuring that? So this goes back to the methods and methodologies that I was talking about earlier. So over the last couple of years, we worked really, really closely with our internal data team to understand the metrics that we're using and also refine those methodologies, because we want to make sure that those metrics that we're relying on accurately reflect what it is, the insights that we're trying to glean. So not only was it important to understand those metrics or refine those metrics, but we also need to be able to take all of that technical information, because despite the fact that I'm up here talking about data, I'm not a data wizard either. I'm a media planner by trade. So I need to take all that technical jargon that doesn't mean anything to me and work with that data team to understand what does that mean and how do I communicate that to our advertising partners. Because again, back to the importance of that relationship and the customer loyalty, transparency is really important to us and to be able to offer our clients. Because we too want them to understand the metrics and methodologies, which is why by practice we include those definitions in our campaign reporting. So, okay, we're good with the methodologies. Now, how do we apply that to our client's business? Well, we've been in this business producing content for years. And we had some anecdotal evidence to suggest that there's no one-size-fits-all methods for successful content marketing. We know that we need the granularity and the nuances to be able to determine what success looks like for different clients. So that's what the scary Excel sheet is up here. Or it was a scary Excel sheet that we attempted to distill down into something that was a little bit less scary to look at. So let me just explain what this means. So it wasn't enough for us to be able to just understand from a client category perspective what success looks like. There's layers to that. So just a common example could be an automotive advertiser that wants us to write a road trip series. I would argue that's not an automotive story, that's more of a travel story. So we track that separately. And then beyond that, we look at, what are the formats that make sense? If we're looking at a photo-heavy piece of content, maybe scroll depth is a little bit more important, so we should track that. If we're looking at a metric like time spent, then the word count plays a factor into that. And again, back to the photos, does custom photography make it more of a difference than, say, supplied or stock photography? So these are all the nuances that we look at and we track through keywords that we apply to each piece of content that we publish on behalf of our clients. But it's not enough to just collect the data. I think just as it's dangerous to produce content from a creative perspective with no data, it's just as dangerous to over-rely on data, because then it becomes sort of a formulaic or a self-fulfilling prophecy. And as we all know, consumer behavior changes all the time. So we have to be mindful of that, and we have to fact check regularly. So for our own practices, we do that on a quarterly basis. And it's important to continue to test and try, just so that you can maybe uncover something new that you didn't think worked historically. So to help illustrate what all of this means, we'll give you a couple examples of what we've been able to uncover from a client category perspective.
Yeah, definitely. So we take the very scary Excel sheet and we turn it into words. We go through this. We essentially meet once a week to go through all of our content categories. You saw it on there. We have 16 content categories, everything from finance to travel, health and pharma to advocacy. We really try to make it narrow enough that it's specific and relevant to the content we're producing, but broad enough that we don't have a sample size of like 2. So up here we've got finance and investing, a classic Globe and Mail topic if there ever was one. And you can see what we track. So we're definitely looking at, again, the data, the metrics, how we're evaluating the success of the content. We're making sure that we're establishing benchmarks for page views, for quality time spent, which again speaks to that custom methodology that we've produced, because we don't just treat all time spent equal. We've created our own methodology for it. We call it quality time spent because we know that it's not just bots landing on the page. And we've also got scroll depth because, finance and investing does tend to be a written article that we're wanting people to read through and really gather that information, get to the bottom of the page. But we also do analysis looking at all of the examples from the past quarter. We go past numbers and we say, okay, what could have contributed to these numbers? Why are we seeing, such strong scroll depth here compared to some of our other content categories, for example? Is it because these articles actually have sort of no photos? Are we actually getting better scroll depth because people are coming and they just want to read and get that information? Are we finding that we're really going at it from that practical answer questions perspective, that solutions-oriented storytelling that really hits the mark for readers who are looking for value and information in this category? Do we feel like there's an opportunity because we have some anecdotal evidence, not enough to, hang your hat on, but a little bit of stuff that's showing us, okay, infographics, these illustrations that are taking the data numbers that not everyone's comfortable with and bringing them into a designed, understandable language, it's really resonating, and the programs that have that are seeing better reach and stronger engagement metrics. Is this something that we're going to test and try more of next quarter so that we have less anecdotal and more, trustworthy data to see, was that a blip or is that really something we're going to start recommending? We build out a sheet like this for every content category, and we now use all of these very much data-backed insights to inform our pitches, to shape the way that we produce content when it comes through our doors, and we share this, like we are now, publicly. It's not necessarily proprietary data. I mean, it is coming out of our proprietary first-party data and our experiences, but the learnings are just as applicable if you're producing finance and investing content for your own world as it is if it lives on ours. And you can see the difference between the finance and investing space and something like travel, which I like to think of as, pretty opposite sides of the spectrum that we work on here at the Globe. So you're seeing, your different numbers on page views and time spent and scroll depth, but you're also seeing different insights. We had a really interesting finding that actually flew in the face of something we thought. We assumed, because we're creatives and we like to think this, that the more creative and designed our pages were, the more successful they would be for travel. We didn't bother, over-designing the finance stories. We figured that was a bit of a stretch. But we thought travel, people want to see it. People want to be immersed in that experience. But when we looked at the data, when we, partnered with Media Strategy and tried to prove that and back that claim up, we found that there was like a chasm in the middle. We had our hyper custom designed, we made an immersive world experience content on the right. That stuff kills. That stuff does so well. And then we had the standard stories that look just like our editorial travel stories on the left. We, used some pretty pictures, but we weren't custom designing the page. Those also did really well against all of those key metrics. And in the middle, we had sort of a halfway point. It looked a little more special than our editorial stories, but it wasn't fully custom designed. It wasn't an immersive world that made it feel as though you were completely out of the Globe and Mail universe. And those ones actually didn't do as great. There was a chasm of engagement. People didn't scroll as much. They weren't sticking around as long. It wasn't hitting that nail on the head of this looks and feels like Globe editorial, and it wasn't hitting the nail on the head of I feel like I'm immersed in the world of the brand. It was a middle ground, and it wasn't working. So we've stopped doing it. And it really was one of those things that we didn't assume that going in when we did this analysis. We learned something and we course corrected. And that's, sometimes not something you want to say when you're standing on stage in front of a room full of people that you got something wrong, but that's exactly what this merging of data and creativity is about. It's about fact-checking our guts and making sure that we're not just letting creative lead us all the way through. And we're going to show you an example of that, of how we use data to improve creative strategy. So we partnered with our friends out in Manitoba, Travel Manitoba. They came to us and they said, our brand is that we are the heart of Canada and we want people to road trip through it and not just fly to Winnipeg. We want them to see everything. And it is drivable. It's a long drive, but it is drivable from Ontario. Once you get to Northern Ontario, it's a lot better. And so we built this beautiful custom world that was totally different than anything you'd expect from the Globe. It was cartoony and fun, and we wanted that immersive experience. We wanted them to hit that design world first and then read about where they're going to go. And we went a little too hard. And we started out with, when you landed on the page, especially on desktop, everything above the fold was just the image. So it's what you're seeing on the left side of the screen. It was just the visual, immersive world. And our engagement metrics at the mid-campaign were not doing great. They weren't bad, but it wasn't, benchmark beating the way that we thought that this awesome campaign was going to, because we knew the content was great. We knew the visuals were fun. So why wasn't it working? So we go over to Kirstie's team and they say, let us take a look.
Yeah, so our hypothesis was that maybe there was a mismatch between what the consumer thought that they were going to land on via the content discovery drivers that we were using, social display, whatever. So we thought, hey, maybe when a user's landing on this page, they don't know what it's about and they're bailing quickly. So one of the things that we tested, which you see as on the other screenshot, is actually moving that headline up on the page. And that made a tremendous impact when we did that at the mid-campaign. We had scroll depth increase by 54% and average time spent increased by 21% just by making that simple change in the moment.
And it's really obvious in hindsight to put the title visible when people land on the page, but it's the kind of thing where you can really put a shrine on the creative vision to the point where it's actually to the detriment of the customer's experience. And that's okay. It happens. As long as you have that gut check, as long as you're constantly looking and saying, are we doing the best on behalf of our client? Are we doing the best on behalf of the consumer, the reader, the viewer, the audience? Are we making sure that we're reflecting the experience they expect while also taking opportunities to surprise and delight? We surprised them a little too much in the first half. We delighted them a little bit more effectively in the second. So what does it look like when you have a successful campaign, but you feel like there's opportunities to go further based on what the data is telling you? We're sticking with travel. It's my happy place. So Newfoundland and Labrador Tourism, a really awesome long-term partner of ours, allowed us to get a little creative. We went into the multimedia world and we commissioned what I like to think of as honestly like micro podcasts almost. These were 2-minute clips. We produced 2 of them per article across a series of 5 articles. We spoke to a local and a visitor, each about the same experience. So a local and a visitor about icebergs, a local and a visitor about like Labrador as a destination. And we had each of their unique points of view, beautiful sound design, you should go read them if you haven't and take a listen, they're awesome. And when we produced them, the campaign did amazing, we were thrilled, but we felt like the audio didn't get the love that we wanted it to. We felt like people were coming and reading the articles, and some of them were engaging with the audio, but a lot of people were just kind of scrolling past it. It was blending in a little bit to the experience. And we realized, well, everything we're pushing in the drivers is all about read more. And even if it did mention that there was an audio piece, the prompt was encouraging you to read and not to listen. There wasn't that emphasis on the audio at that first touch point with the audience. So again, we go to the media strategy team.
Yeah, so we had, as Jess said, we had people engaging with the audio content. And maybe not as much as we would like, is that a wasted asset? No, not necessarily. How do we get more people to actually listen to that audio asset? Well, I think the way that we looked at it is maybe we need to take that extra step out of that user journey. Instead of expecting somebody to click on an ad and then click on an audio clip, we just took that audio clip and moved it into the ad space. So not only are we able to get more exposure of these audio assets, but our cost per audio play dropped by 91% just by doing that. So it's not always, oh, this was a failure. It's how do we think about better ways to utilize those assets and really think about our customer behavior to best get that message in front of them.
I know that we're like a minute away from getting a little red card from the people watching us on timing, so I'm going to keep rolling. But what this also really emphasizes is that your content assets do not need to be a one and done. There are so many opportunities to reuse, reduce, recycle, make a lot of it. Like there's a ton there. And I'll throw it to you for our last one here. where we dive into the world of evaluating content based on the format itself. So just to kick off, this is a partnership with Joe Fresh. It's a retail client. Yeah, they want people to read, they want people to look at the pictures, but what do they really want? They want you to click through and add to cart. We're gonna evaluate link click-throughs with a lot more emphasis than we are on a finance story or even a travel story where like the idea is not to get people to add to cart. The idea is to get them to commit to booking that trip, and that's happening through an awareness level campaign. So you want to make sure that your measurements, your KPIs are really reflecting at the format level and as well as at that content category level.
Exactly, and even from a discovery perspective, you have to think about how people are actually engaging in that environment. So, we like to think about social is really efficient, probably our most efficient way to get people on the page, but it might not actually be the best tool depending on the type of content that we're running. So if you think about somebody who's mindlessly scrolling through their social feed, they're not really in the right headspace to say read like a heavy finance or investing article. They just want a quick hit, entertaining piece of information. So we actually learned that maybe that's not really the best tool for us for that type of content. Whereas when we host, when our audience is discovering it within a more native environment, when they're already primed for finance and investing content, that's where we see the most engagement. And then just to take it a step further from an audience perspective, these are a couple of insights that we get from our commercial data team so that we can learn whether or not it's actually basically just to validate whether we hit the right audience or to educate us on, either maybe we didn't hit that audience that the client was looking for and there's an opportunity to maybe reach a new audience because they've signaled to us that they're interested, or maybe tweak the message or the targeting strategy. What these insights also tell us is that these are multifaceted individuals, and maybe there's some other topics that we might want to consider with our content marketing efforts going forward, or maybe some of our targeting strategies going forward.
Business decision makers travel too. It's just true,
Exactly.
We're getting the scary buzzer, which is okay because we're at our takeaway. So this is your screenshot slide. So if you missed anything, these are our big 3 takeaways, which is really that greater granularity of your data is going to allow you to get better information more effectively. You should be constantly gut checking. You can't just take one pulse check a year because consumer behavior changes faster than that. So you have to be checking your data just as quickly. And with that, I think we're going to leave it for the next session. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, guys.